Our next reader from Haines, Alaska is Marie Rose. You need this? Okay.
Thank you.
Is that about right?
Maybe up. Perfect.
Okay, cool.
Hello, everybody. So most people know me as Rose, but you can call me Marie or Rose. I'll reply to both. This is my first Fisher Poets I've ever been to, and I think one of my favorite parts about it has been hearing stories about people who grew up in fishing. I actually grew up in Michigan, and to be quite honest with you, my dad tried to get me to go fishing with him so many times as a kid, and I never wanted anything to do with it. So I apologized to him consistently. You can imagine his surprise when I told him I wanted to work in the fishing industry in Alaska. I recently went back to Chicago to visit family, and my cousin had just had a baby, and he was just 4 days old. And it wasn't until then that I realized how different my life is now. I was holding the baby in my arms and thinking to myself, the last fragile thing I cradled in my arms was a 20-pound king salmon. So I'm going to start with a poem that I wrote kind of reflecting on growing up in a state where I was surrounded by lakes and always really having an appreciation for water. It's definitely translated into my life now where I live next to the ocean, but I figured this would be a good place to start. I remember when the water that splashed my lips was absent of salt, sewing an invisible thread around my toes, pulled tight by a wave every time the sand exhaled. We know what outlines us, even if we cannot see it. Even when the Great Lakes are miles away in every direction, we are still the buffer, built to protect what sustains us. Imagine that I am a sandcastle on the beach. Water is the glue of my structure. It holds me together, and after the waves roll in, it allows me a fresh start. What is life without that? So the next one I'm going to read is about roots. I don't know why, but whenever I'm on the boat, I can't take my eyes off the coast and the trees on the coast. It's always really blown my mind the way they appear to really be growing into these boulders, the coast being so rough. And I don't know, maybe it's because I've always kind of felt like coming from Michigan, I was almost carrying my own roots on my shoulders, trying to figure out where I could live, where I felt like my roots were compatible. And I definitely found that in Alaska. So here goes. I've always had a fascination with the way things are rooted. I want to know the way you grow from this earth when your arms are full of green, yet you sit atop a surface so rugged and worn. I see you locked down during every storm, buckle your knees and brace for the ocean's tantrum that spits and crashes and shapes the only thing you stand on. Tell me, how do you survive when your roots grow into something so unforgiving? When the wind howls, I drop another anchor, but you stay grounded, arms above your head as if to halt September storms. This is another one about kind of my observations of everything that's around me. When my first season working on the water, I was actually working on an all-female crew on the Shoreline Scow, which is just near Cross Sound, near the coast of southeast Alaska. And, before I'd moved to Alaska several years before, I had found myself in a pretty abusive relationship. And when I moved to Alaska, I kind of had in my head that, I was going to Alaska, and for whatever reason, I was going to heal there, and I was going to find something there that I hadn't had before in my life. And when I wrote this poem, I felt like that really came full circle for me in finding parallels between my life years before and where I was now. This body is an ocean. It decides where the shore begins and where it ends. It shapes each rock with the strength of each wave, one wave at a time. It does not determine the weather, but it tries to listen, to rage the wind's whistle, to lie still in sorbet-shaded sunsets. My mind, a tide, exhales driftwood, thrashed by words, smoothed by time. Carry my baggage to shore, further, please. Inhale imprints into the sand. Leave behind the skeleton of my mistakes, of his rage. Help harness my sanity with an anchor. But don't let me drown, body. I fought too hard for this. Current. Pull me from my past, beneath my feet. Let me tumble in this. Wake me up. This body is not your bycatch. This body will catch you, cradle you in my swell. Swear to me, body, that you will never surrender to the open sea, that you will move swiftly, sliding through clumps of slippery kelp, never so slow that our limbs would intertwine, tangle in what is tangible, but never, ever enough. Bear with me, body. We are learning what is enough. I'm going to read one more, and I'll say first that I am glad to see so many women in the crowd. More often than not, I'll sit down to write about, fishing or trees or whatever it is, and more often than not, it'll end up being a poem about how much women have influenced me in my life. Sometimes I'm like, oh gosh, that really was supposed to be about fishing, and it's about my mom again, but I guess I just don't see that as a bad thing anymore. So, my gloves are cold and damp, saturated with the stench of fish and sweat. I have woken up in a postcard again, or maybe on a roller coaster that cruises up and over 8-foot swells for 5 days. I haven't worked an 8 to 5 in 2 years. Instead, I wipe splatters of fish blood from my face, hold their hearts in my hand and feel them beat, a rhythm just like these waves beneath my feet. Have you ever held a heart that gives you life? I imagine it as the feeling my mother had the first time she held me, whispered, "You will do so much good in the world." I watched her nurture, watched her weave the loose ends of our lives together, watched women be the tool that transformed yarn into clothing, a baby into a being, watched them fight to belong to a world they've held together with calloused hands, receiving so little in return. I learned selflessness from their tired eyes. I learned toughness from miscarriage, an elevator speech of everything my mother sacrificed for me. And now, as my body levitates with the movement of the ocean, my toes are like white caps curling under to find balance, to make sense of why it just seems so typical of mankind to threaten a species that has done nothing but exist and nurture. I thank salmon as I pull them aboard, promise them that I will never support an industry that seeks to replace them. Handle them like stained glass reflecting off the sun. They will carve years into our future, nourish those I am tied to by time and tradition, give and take. Their scales are a shield over my heart. They protect me from what is not humble, fierce, or wild. I have never felt so rich as the moment I first placed my hand on their meat, red gold. Glowing like they are our survival, they have become my survival. I have spent years wondering if I would be a spruce tree or a hemlock, but my needles are neither sharp nor well-rounded. It wasn't until I watched salt water merge with blood that I realized, a vibrant red that I'd only ever seen between my legs, that I realized I have always been a salmon. Each scale, a story of remembering. The coast, jumper cables to my veins, gives me energy for life on days that feel too heavy to heal. Alaska did not introduce me to connection, but it taught me to connect silence with self-love, solitude with content. It led by example and showed me how to choose the place that does not compromise my well-being, to love the person who only holds my heart with positive intent, to grow past what I'd ingrained in myself to resent. Like salmon, I will always fight to reach the stream that allows the most resilience. That is the only way for me. Thank you, everyone.